The rain drummed against the windows of Harrison and Associates law firm, creating a melancholy soundtrack for what should have been a somber family gathering. Instead, the mahogany-paneled conference room buzzed with barely concealed excitement as my siblings waited to claim their prize. I'm Victoria Sterling, though my family had taken to calling me Vicky the Disappointment for the past decade. At 35, I was the middle child who'd chosen a different path, leaving the family's luxury lifestyle to build something of my own. Something they'd never understood or respected. "Thank you all for coming," Mr. Harrison began, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he surveyed the assembled Sterling family. "I know this is a difficult time losing Eleanor so suddenly." My sister Melissa dabbed her eyes with a designer tissue, though I noticed her tears had dried remarkably quickly after Mom's funeral yesterday. Her husband Brad sat beside her in his perfectly pressed suit, already calculating how much the inheritance would boost their social standing. My brother Christopher lounged in his chair with characteristic arrogance, checking his Rolex impatiently. At 40, he'd spent his entire life coasting on the family name and Mom's financial support. His wife Sandra perched beside him like an expensive ornament, her designer bag probably costing more than most people's monthly rent. And then there was me, in my simple black dress and sensible shoes, carrying a worn leather briefcase that had belonged to my grandfather. The family disappointment who'd walked away from their world of country clubs and charity galas to build something real. "Now then," Mr. Harrison continued, breaking the wax seal on Mom's will. "Eleanor was very specific about her wishes." Melissa leaned forward eagerly. She'd been Mom's favorite, the one who'd married well and produced the perfect grandchildren. The one who'd never questioned Mom's values or chosen her own path. "To my daughter Melissa," Mr. Harrison read, "I leave the family home at 1247 Beacon Hill, along with all furnishings and contents therein." Melissa squeezed Brad's hand triumphantly. The Beacon Hill mansion was worth $12 million, not counting the priceless antiques and art collection inside. "To my son Christopher, I leave my investment portfolio, currently valued at approximately $8 million, along with the family vacation home in Martha's Vineyard." Christopher's smirk widened. He'd been counting on that money to cover his gambling debts and failed business ventures, though Mom had never known about those particular problems. "And to my daughter Victoria." Mr. Harrison paused, his expression sympathetic. "I leave my jewelry collection and personal effects, along with my sincere hope that she will find her way back to the family that loves her." The silence that followed was deafening. $20,000 worth of jewelry versus $20 million in real estate and investments. The message was clear. Come crawling back or get nothing. "That's it." Christopher laughed. "Mom's jewelry box? I guess that's what happens when you turn your back on your family." Melissa's fake sympathy was worse than Christopher's cruelty. "Oh Vicky, I'm so sorry. But you know how Mom felt about your choices. Maybe if you'd stayed close, if you'd been there for her." "I'd been there for her. Every doctor's appointment during her cancer treatment, every late-night phone call when she couldn't sleep, every moment she'd needed support. But I'd done it quietly without fanfare, while they'd made grand gestures when it suited them." "The estate is quite substantial," Brad added, unable to hide his glee. "Between the properties and investments, we're looking at generational wealth here." Sandra nodded enthusiastically. "The Martha's Vineyard house alone could fund our children's entire education." "Now there is one small matter," Mr. Harrison interrupted, shuffling through additional papers. "There seems to be some confusion about the Beacon Hill property." Melissa's head snapped up. "What kind of confusion?" "According to county records, the property was sold 3 years ago to Sterling Holdings LLC. The current owner has been allowing Mrs. Sterling to remain as a tenant, but—" "That's impossible," Christopher stood up abruptly. "Mom owned that house for 30 years. She would never sell it." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder, placing it quietly on the polished conference table. The sound of paper against wood seemed to echo in the sudden silence. "Actually," I said calmly, "she did sell it. To me." The color drained from Melissa's face. "What are you talking about?" I opened the folder, revealing the property deed with my signature and Mom's, dated 3 years earlier. When Mom got sick, she needed money for experimental treatments not covered by insurance. Treatments that saved her life for 3 more years. "But the will." Brad sputtered. She left the house to Melissa. She left her former house to Melissa, I corrected. A house she no longer owned. Mr. Harrison examined the documents, his eyebrows rising. These appear to be legitimate. Mrs. Sterling, you purchased the property for $15 million, I supplied. Above market value because it was my childhood home and Mom needed the money immediately. Christopher slammed his hand on the table. This is fraud. You manipulated a sick woman. Did I? I pulled out another document. Here's the letter Mom wrote to her doctor, explaining that her daughter Victoria had made it possible for her to afford the treatments. She was quite clear about her gratitude. Sandra leaned over to examine the papers. But this means, you own everything? Not everything, I said quietly. Let me show you what else I own. I opened my laptop and connected it to the conference room's display screen. Financial documents filled the large monitor, showing a complex web of property holdings and business investments. Sterling Holdings LC. I began clicking through the presentation, owns not just Mom's former house, but also the Martha's Vineyard property, which I purchased 2 years ago when the previous owner defaulted on their mortgage. Christopher's face went white. That's impossible. Mom said it was paid off. It was. By me. The previous owner was about to lose it to the bank. Mom asked me to help save it for the family. I clicked to the next slide showing investment portfolios. As for the $8 million in investments, that's interesting. Let me show you where that money actually came from. The screen displayed a series of loan documents. 3 years ago, Christopher came to Mom desperate for money. $8 million to cover gambling debts and failed investments. Mom didn't have liquid assets, so she borrowed against her investment portfolio. Sandra stared at her husband in horror. Christopher, you said that money was for a business opportunity. The loans were due 6 months ago, I continued. I paid them off to prevent Mom from losing everything. So technically that $8 million in investments, it's collateral against money I loaned to save Christopher's life. This is insane, Melissa whispered. You're saying you own everything? I clicked to a comprehensive asset overview. The Beacon Hill Mansion, the Martha's Vineyard house, the investment portfolio that covers Christopher's debts, plus several other properties you don't know about. The list was extensive. Commercial real estate downtown, luxury apartments across the city, even the country club where they'd spent every weekend for the past decade. How? Brad asked, his voice barely audible. How did you afford all this? I smiled slightly, remembering all the times they'd mocked my small business ventures and foolish investments. While you were living off Mom's money, I was building Sterling Innovations. We develop AI software for Fortune 500 companies. Christopher's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. But you said you were just consulting. I am. My company consults with Google, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon. Last year's revenue was just over $2 billion. The silence that followed was profound. Outside, the rain had stopped and pale sunlight was beginning to filter through the clouds. $2 billion. Sandra whispered. That's just revenue, I clarified. Net worth is significantly higher, especially with the real estate portfolio. Melissa found her voice first. But why? Why keep it secret? Why let us think you were struggling? I looked at my sister, remembering the child she'd been before money and status consumed her. Because I wanted to see who you really were. Whether you'd love me for myself or just for what I could give you. And now? Christopher asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. I stood up, gathering my documents. Now you know that the daughter you dismissed as a failure owns everything you thought you were inheriting. So what happens to us? Melissa's voice cracked. Where are we supposed to live? You can stay in the Beacon Hill house, I said quietly. All of you. But not as owners. As tenants. I pulled out lease agreements I'd prepared that morning. Market rate rent. First month due in 30 days. No special treatment, no family discounts. Brad examined the lease with trembling hands. $25,000 a month? We can't afford that. Then I suggest you find jobs, I replied. Real jobs, not the charity board positions and social clubs you've been calling careers. Christopher stood up, his face red with rage. You can't do this to us. We're family. Family. I closed my briefcase with a decisive snap. When was the last time any of you called me just to talk? When did you visit Mom in the hospital without being asked? When did you treat me like anything more than an embarrassment? The room fell silent again. They knew the answers to those questions. I loved Mom, I continued, my voice steady despite the emotions threatening to break through. I took care of her when she was sick. I made sure she could afford the treatments that gave us 3 more years together. I protected her assets from Christopher's creditors. And I did it all quietly without fanfare because that's what family does. I walked toward the door then paused. The lease agreements include one special clause. If any of you can show me genuine change over the next year, real jobs, honest living, treating people with respect regardless of their bank accounts, we can renegotiate the terms. And if we don't? Melissa asked. I met her eyes. Then you'll find out what it's really like to have nothing. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. There's one more thing. Victoria, your mother left a sealed letter specifically for you. He handed me an envelope marked "For Victoria Only" in Mom's careful handwriting. I opened it slowly, aware that my siblings were watching my every expression. My dearest Victoria, if you're reading this, then you've just had quite a shock in that conference room. I know you bought the house and saved the investments. I know about your company and your success. I've always known. I also know your brother and sister have no idea how hard you've worked or how much you've sacrificed for this family. They think money comes from birthright rather than effort. I wrote this will to teach them a lesson they desperately need to learn. True wealth isn't what you inherit, it's what you build. And true family isn't about what someone can give you, it's about what you're willing to give them. You've already given us everything. Now it's their turn to learn what that means. I love you all, but I'm especially proud of the woman you've become. Sister's glove, Mom. Please check the safety deposit box at First National. Box 847. The key is in my jewelry box, which really is yours. I folded the letter carefully, tucking it into my briefcase. My siblings watched expectantly, but I didn't share its contents. Some things were meant to be private. I have a board meeting this afternoon, I said, checking my watch. The lease agreements are valid for 48 hours. After that, standard eviction proceedings begin. I walked out of Harrison and Associates and into the brightening afternoon, leaving behind a family that was finally beginning to understand the difference between inheritance and worth. 2 weeks later, I sat in Mom's former study, my study now, reviewing the quarterly reports from Sterling Innovations. The company was expanding into neural network architecture, and we just signed partnerships with 3 major automotive manufacturers for autonomous vehicle systems. My phone buzzed with a text from Christopher. Started working at Henderson Electronics. Manager position. It's honest work. Thank you for the wake-up call. A second message from Melissa. Brad got a job at the law firm downtown. I'm tutoring kids in math. We're making it work. The house feels different now. Better. I smiled, thinking about Mom's letter and the safety deposit box I'd visited that morning. Inside had been documents showing that she'd been secretly funding scholarships for underprivileged students for years, using money I'd given her from the property sales. She'd been building her own legacy of generosity, just as I'd been building mine. Standing up, I walked to the window overlooking the garden where Mom had loved to read. Tomorrow I would visit her grave and tell her about the new scholarship fund I was establishing in her name. One that would help students who, like me, dared to build something from nothing. Because that's what real inheritance is. Not what you're given, but what you choose to create. And sometimes, the greatest gift you can give your family is the chance to discover their own strength. The evening sun cast long shadows across the lawn as I returned to my work, building something that would outlast any inheritance. A legacy of innovation, determination, and the quiet power that comes from proving yourself right through actions, not words. 3 months after that devastating day in the lawyer's office, I received a call from Melissa. Her voice was different, stronger, more confident than I'd heard in years. Vicky, I wanted to invite you to dinner. Not here at the house. At our new apartment. Brad and I found a place we can actually afford, and I want to show you what we're building. I drove to their modest 2-bedroom apartment in Cambridge, a far cry from their former mansion lifestyle. Melissa answered the door wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her face free of the heavy makeup she'd always worn to impress others. Come in, she said, and for the first time in years her smile seemed genuine. The apartment was small but warm. Photos of their children covered the walls instead of expensive artwork. Brad looked up from the kitchen where he was cooking. Actually cooking, not ordering from expensive restaurants. Victoria, he said, wiping his hands on an apron. Thank you for coming. Their children, 8-year-old Emma and 10-year-old Jack, ran up to hug me. They'd grown taller and somehow seemed happier despite the dramatic change in their circumstances. Aunt Vicky, Emma exclaimed. Mom's teaching me about computers. She says you're really good with them. I glanced at Melissa, surprised. You're learning programming? She nodded, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. I enrolled in community college. Computer science. It turns out I actually enjoy problem solving when it's not about social politics. Over dinner. Homemade lasagna that was infinitely better than anything they'd served at their fancy dinner parties. They told me about their new lives. Brad was working his way up at a small law firm, taking cases he believed in rather than just the ones that paid the most. Melissa was excelling in her studies while tutoring high school students in mathematics. The funny thing is, Brad said, serving dessert he'd made himself, we're happier. Really happier. We talk to each other now instead of just coordinating schedules. The kids are happier too, Melissa added. They're learning that self-worth comes from what you accomplish, not what you own. After dinner, as the children played in their rooms, Melissa and I sat on the small balcony overlooking a tree-lined street. I owe you an apology, she said quietly. More than an apology. I owe you my gratitude. Melissa. No, let me say this. I spent so many years thinking I was better than you because I had more expensive things. Because I married well and lived in the right neighborhood. But you were building something real while I was just existing. She paused, watching the evening light filter through the leaves. Mom's death was a wake-up call, but what you did, showing us the truth about our finances, that saved us. We were heading for disaster. Christopher's debts, our spending, the way we were raising our kids to believe they were entitled to everything. You didn't just inherit Mom's estate. You inherited her wisdom. I thought about Mom's letter still tucked safely in my desk at home. She wanted us all to understand the difference between having money and being wealthy. And now I do. Being wealthy means having something you built yourself. It means knowing you can take care of your family through your own effort. It means teaching your children to be proud of their work, not their possessions. A month later, Christopher called to tell me he'd been promoted to assistant manager at Henderson Electronics. His voice carried a pride I'd never heard before, the pride of earning something rather than inheriting it. Sandra and I are getting divorced, he said matter-of-factly. Turns out she was only interested in the lifestyle, not the man. But that's okay. I'm finally figuring out who I am without Mom's money propping me up. How are you doing with that? I asked. Better than I expected. I'm seeing a counselor about the gambling addiction. Paying off the debts with my own money slowly but surely. And Victoria. I'm sorry. For all of it. For never seeing who you really were. 6 months after Mom's funeral, I hosted Thanksgiving dinner at the Beacon Hill house. Not as the owner lording over tenants, but as a sister welcoming family home. Melissa brought her famous sweet potato casserole. Famous among her new friends at school, not the country club set. Christopher arrived with his girlfriend Maria, a nurse he'd met at his AA meetings who loved him for his kindness, not his bank account. Their children played together in the same rooms where we'd grown up, but the atmosphere was entirely different. Warmer. More real. More like the family Mom had always hoped we'd become. As we sat around the dining room table that had witnessed so many cold, formal dinners, I realized that the greatest inheritance Mom had left us wasn't money or property. It was the chance to discover who we really were when stripped of pretense and entitlement. I have an announcement, I said as we finished dinner. I'm establishing the Eleanor Sterling Foundation for Educational Innovation. It will provide full scholarships and mentorship for students who want to build their own businesses but lack the financial resources to get started. That's wonderful, Melissa said. What can we do to help? I smiled, looking around the table at faces that finally reflected genuine interest rather than obligation. I was hoping you'd ask. The foundation needs an education coordinator and a legal advisor. If you're interested. Are you offering us jobs? Christopher asked, his voice carefully neutral. I'm offering you the chance to help build something meaningful. With salaries based on your contributions, not your last names. They exchanged glances, then Christopher grinned. The first genuine smile I'd seen from him in years. When do we start? That evening, as my siblings helped clear dishes and load the dishwasher, tasks they would never have done in their former lives, I stepped out onto the terrace overlooking the garden. Mom's spirit felt present in the cool November air, in the sound of genuine laughter coming from the kitchen, in the way my family had finally learned to work together rather than simply expect to be served. I pulled out my phone and opened the photo I'd taken earlier. All of us around the dinner table, faces relaxed and genuinely happy. Not posed for social media or charity event photographers, but captured in a moment of real connection. This was the inheritance Mom had really wanted to leave us. Not money or property, but the understanding that true wealth comes from building something together, from earning respect rather than demanding it, from loving people for who they are rather than what they can provide. The autumn wind rustled through the old oak tree in the garden, the same tree we'd climbed as children when the world seemed full of infinite possibilities. As I watched the leaves fall and prepare for winter's transformation, I realized that sometimes families, like seasons, need to die back to their roots before they can grow again. And sometimes the daughter who walks away from everything becomes the one who saves it all. Inside, I could hear Melissa explaining coding concepts to Emma while Christopher helped Jack with his math homework. My successful, reformed family building new traditions around education and effort rather than exhibition and entitlement. Mom would have been proud. Not of the money I'd made or the property I'd acquired, but of the family I'd helped rebuild. Because in the end, that was the greatest empire of all. One built on love, respect, and the quiet satisfaction of watching people you care about discover their own strength. The foundation would launch next month, ensuring that other families wouldn't have to learn these lessons the hard way. But for tonight, it was enough to stand in the garden of my childhood home, listening to the sound of my family learning to be genuinely happy. Sometimes the best inheritance isn't what you receive, it's what you choose to give back.